For posing the turnaround, there's really not much to talk about. The only thing I would recommend doing is going down the peg hierarchy. So you don't want to grab the hand, go to the next view, and then move it over. Let me get an example. We want to get these pieces in the correct position. But if we say grab the eyes and then move them over so they're in the correct position, once we go up to the face, they'll be out of position again. What you primarily want to do is work from the top and go down. Where the neck is fine. Then we go down to the head, still fine. The face, we want to move the entire face over. The nose, we want to move the nose slightly more over. That's pretty much everything you're going to be doing. You're going to be working downwards rather than upwards like we've been doing. A lot of stuff doesn't need to move, so the body and the lower body can kind of just stay as they are, because we don't really want to mess with these pegs, especially if we're flipping anything. And then upper body, as long as the peg is central, which it should be since we made all of the pivots come from the center. So pretty much everything over here doesn't need to be messed with. The shirt doesn't need to be messed with. The neck can move. The arms can move. The head can move. The legs can move. Anything that's kind of the central body, you can kind of just leave where it is, excluding stuff that is internal like this. So there's nothing really to talk about with this step. I'm just going to speed up the posing process. And if there's anything specific, I'll stop throughout. When it comes to limbs, even though we've placed the pivot points or the articulation points, if we get to the view and we can rotate it and like pretty closely match up the arms, so like that's pretty. We can probably get it even closer if we bring this down and rotate it just a bit more. Now the pivot point isn't where the articulation point is. That's fine, you know. You don't 100% have to match it up if the design is so close that it's not even noticeable. All you have to do is just readjust slightly to hit the design without having to go through the entire process of matching up the pivots. When it comes to the hand and the mouth, I've turned the mouth off for now, and I'll leave the hand on, but I won't be drawing anything. We're going to save that for drawing the libraries, and I prefer to do stuff in stages, so it's kind of a time waster to pose out one pose and then go grab your tablet and start drawing the hand, and then pose out the next pose and then go draw a hand. It's easier to just do them all in the one go. So we're just going to leave this one hand default while we pose the character. If you run into an issue like this where there's an object behind another object and you want to move it forward but it doesn't come forward, let me check the render view. Yeah, it actually came forward on the render view. That happens when there's too much stuff going on inside of a composite. So if you can't get the one thing to go on top of another thing, make a new composite. Separate those two. Go back in. Apply the cutter. And boom. Now you should be able to move it on top. Also, don't forget, since we had to edit this side, we also have to go to the other leg and edit that side as well. You can copy and paste it, but at this stage where we're posing stuff, there's kind of not really a need. Like, we've already posed one of the feet, so just adjust it as you need. That is view 2 posed. Just gotta do that 3 more times. I'd recommend at this point just making sure everything moves correctly, because sometimes you could pose a deformer in a certain way and then completely forget that you left a pivot behind. So just go through and make sure everything works. And especially moving arms and stuff around, because you'll notice you never really lined up things that are hidden behind the character. So that's a good thing to do. And when everything looks good, go to your keyframes, F7, F7, set your keyframes, and then go to the next one. This nose is one of the instances where we're going to basically make an exact duplicate of the nose. So if we turn our reference off, we can see that it still has that left nostril, even though technically it's kind of being hidden by the cheek. It's still going to be very annoying to leave there. So we're just going to duplicate the drawing, assign it the same deformer, go to the overlay, and then delete that left nostril. There we go. We're running into this issue with the eyebrow, where it originally started off as too large of a shape, so trying to get it down to fit is going to be an issue. Realistically, if this is your own character, I think it looks fine. Like, it blends in, it doesn't look that deformed, but what we're going to do is just make it its own substitution swap. And I can use this opportunity to show you a cool function that we can do. One of our tools that we can make up in this top area is called Convert to New Drawing and Add Deformation Chain. What this does is it takes the deformed shape and makes an exact replica of the deformed shape and keeps the deformer it will be a new deformer, but both of them are technically the same. So if you tween between both deformers, they'll actually tween into one another. For example, so we can click on this. It'll give us this new substitution called cooked. We can change that to 2 or profile, depending on if you want to name these. The one issue with this is it will turn your lines into brush strokes. So you can see that they're kind of different. You can modify them. What you have to do is select it, right click, go down to convert brush strokes to pencil lines, and it will bring them back to a pencil line. But if you have any kind of multi-jointed sections, it will get a bit funky. So you're gonna have to clean that up. And then now you can start reposing this to match the new shape. Don't worry about the color. And once it's in the correct shape, we can delete the fill, turn off our reference. So we're going to apply bumpy. This can happen sometimes where the texture is overly stretched when you do this. So all you have to do is grab it and bring it back down. And then about double the length like usual. Now we fill it back in. Now we add our points to the object, fill in the color. So then we assign it the new transformation that the drawing made. And now we have a new substitution. And these two should tween into one another. And just test it and make sure that it cuts everything. That is a very handy and quick way to clean up a substitution and make it fit the design. I've decided to limit the hair down a bit more because realistically, this is a lot of stuff to be moving at a time, and you don't really need that for hair, especially if there's a lot of it. So I'm going to, like we done with the ponytail, make a new deformer and turn these into freeform deformers. So just add one at each point and then one in the middle. So we can just mass select them and then move them around like this. Even more if you grab other ones. So that should make it move a bit more. You will kind of get this bumpiness going off. You can fix that by adding just more points where it's moving too much. And if you actually just want a nice little buoyancy going on. You can add one in the center. You can get a very subtle sway. The only issue with this is it will distort your lines. So I don't super recommend one in the center, but generally it's a quick way to get a lot of motion. And you can even grab these little kind of purple handles on the side and get a wavy effect. But again, don't stretch too much because then you'll start making the line too thin. This does mean that we will have to slightly be more off model. It was kind of fine because the hair was off model originally. This actually kind of makes it work a little easier. But we just match it as close as we can get it. And now it kind of flows even better than last time. As you've kind of seen, hair can be very messy. It's a lot of battles you need to choose between. So even though this part of the hair is in front, this part is behind, which means you'd have to break it into two pieces, which doesn't affect any of the other views, so it's really not necessary. This sideburn type part of the hair, it scales slightly in every view, and you can like try and match by like stretching it, but that's just gonna mess with the lines a bit too much. So it doesn't particularly matter if it looks good outside of the reference. You don't have to go through and redraw every little thing as long as it looks natural. Now when you get to stuff like the fringe, the shine, this part is just slightly a bit shorter than every other view. There's no point of redrawing that. Just keep it as it is. And because before we decided to just ignore these slight notches, there's a couple of stuff we can do. We can use a line weld like we've done previously to get all of these extra lines. That's gonna make the hair heavy. Hair is probably the heaviest part of a rig if you try and make it fully dynamic. Sorting it out for this will just add extra heft to something that looks completely fine. And then even more when you get to a view like this, these cutoff points are just too different from these cutoff points. So you'll have to then probably redraw these sections. A lot of this is just feeling it. Feeling, do I need to do this? Is this a noticeable thing? Is it really important? Like, if you cheap out on like the logo on her shirt, people will notice that. That's a very obvious thing because it's a defining feature of her character. But if you don't include this tiny notch, no one's gonna know. Especially the people that are looking at the rig without ever seeing the design. They're not gonna go, man, I wish there was just a tiny bit of notch there. Again, this is very specific to rigging your own character. If this was for production, you would either put a bit more effort into changing stuff, but also remember that you're going to be making multiple characters like a week. So half of the time you're going to be messaging a supervisor and being like, can I just not include this bit? look at how much effort this is going to be, and they will most likely say, yeah, don't include that bit. One of the things I also noticed was this shadow piece has a diamond shape, and that's where these two shadows are overlapping, and it makes the section darker than it's meant to be. We can solve this by going back to our setup for the shadow. If we turn this composite into a bitmap, it's going to flatten everything. So if you render this, it's gone because these two objects are no longer overlapping. They are the same object at that point. But then if you go to your side view, setting stuff to bitmap basically stops you from being able to move anything in Z depth. So you don't want this to be a part of this composite. So if we turn this back to pasture, it'll fix itself. We want to just make a separate composite for the shadow. Change that to bitmap, so it flattens just everything going into the shadow, but not the actual output over here. So that should solve our problem without causing the other problem. What I recommend doing for posing the back arm is to bring it forward and then pose it like the front arm, push it back, and then just move it slightly over, just so you can kind of differentiate between the bits and bobs, especially if you have controllers or anything on it. We decided at the start that we were going to extend this leg because realistically this is such a wide stance. If you were to try and do a walk with this, it might look a bit off, so we were just going to slightly match them up like this instead, so they're more even. This is why you should always generally check every time you pose something in the render view to make sure that nothing's broken. You might notice most of the body is pretty good, but then when you get down to this foot, there's a bit of cracking going on, which you don't see unless you're in the render view. That just means that the shape is being morphed a bit too aggressively. So you can kind of ease it off, or generally one of these points will be causing the cracking. So if you just kind of stretch them out a bit more, this should solve it. When going into the back 3/4 and even the back, I prefer to not take the most immediate view, so this would be the profile view, and turn that into the quarter. I grab the front quarter and then place it over the back quarter, because most of the time it's the same shape. Everything has just been moved to the front. You just have to remember that these legs now need to be swapped. So this left leg needs to go to the right, and then the right leg to the left, left arm to the right, right to the left. And the bonus for this view is you really don't have to pose most stuff on the face. I recommend just pulling everything off the face and then just start turning everything off. Some stuff like the back of the neck, it's kind of subjective. You can, if you want this to cut away as it's touching the head, you totally can. You can go in, cut the line out by the head, problem solved. I prefer to just delete the line. Doesn't have to make it any heavy. This will always be behind the head. You'll never see this connection up until this point. So just deleting the line tends to work. We're also going to change up these lines for the hair So we have hair backline 01 and 02, but they're both singulars, so then we'll have to duplicate and make two more. This hair now is so simple that having these as their own thing isn't even super necessary. So hairline 01 is going to have both lines, and then hairline 02 is going to have both lines on the opposite side. Pretty much like we've been doing up until this point. For this one instance, since we have so many tabs and all of our off drawings are these tabs, so you can't really turn them off unless you made a separate substitution called tab, and that's what these were. This is the first time I would recommend just putting them somewhere, so behind the head, and then pushing using Z depth. This will mean that we're no longer pushing by 4s, we're going to be pushing by trees, so 0005. Well, what we would normally do would add an extra 0, so it's only slightly nudged, but that's mainly to stop accidents with animation and colliding with backgrounds and stuff. So for this instance, it's perfectly fine. As you go along rigging, you will notice that you've just kind of missed some stuff, so you don't want this to be outside of the head generally. The same with the eyes. A lot of the time people want to keep the eyes inside the head. I don't mind it, especially if they have kind of this bulging look to the eye, and see the way the eyelashes are like coming outside of the head. the character is now posed. If we flick on true, we can have a look at the character. We can mess around with parts of the limbs to make sure they bend correctly, rotate, lift, make sure everything kind of connects. And especially turn on render preview and have a look at the character and just make sure that anything isn't broken. But this character looks good. I don't see any major breaking anywhere. So just go through and just start adjusting. Once everything is perfect, we can start clicking on the keyframes. So make sure the entire rig is collapsed like this. Hit F6 to place a keyframe, and then go through and just do it on each of them. So because the rig is collapsed, that means that everything in the rig will have a keyframe added to it. You will be doing this bit later when it comes to the master controls and cleaning up the rig, but for now, what I like to do before I start copy and pasting is to go into the X sheet. Very confusing. It's mainly used for old people, no offense, and like traditional animation or even like stop motion animation. It's not crazy useful for rigging. You can add expressions and stuff, so that's kind of useful. That's more advanced. But for now, what this is telling me is each of these are the drawings, and then each of these are the instances. So the eyebrow wrinkle is always off. The eyebrow is on, then it's on instance 2, and then off and off. So what we're using this for is to just go through, make sure everything either has an instance or it's on the off instance. If you've been nice and tidy, shouldn't be anything wrong. But this one looks perfect. So now you can grab a keyframe on the back, copy it, go to the next frame, paste, and then do that for each of the keyframes going backwards. So paste. You should end up with 10 keyframes. You can also have 8. A lot of the time you don't need to do a flipped version of the front view and the back view. I just kind of think it's helpful because if you want to tween something from this view to this view, imagine this was flipped. I'll just do that for an example. If you wanted to tween something from this view to this view, if you only had one back, this to this would tween perfectly. So the animation wouldn't crack. But then once it tries to tween between this and this, it will start breaking because everything will flip. So suddenly your rig will vanish, and it's not actually vanished, it's just flattened, basically turned into this. It's so small you can't see it. What's useful for having 2 backs is you can have a tween from this to this, then set a new keyframe, flip the back, and then set a tween from that to this. That's how you would use these. But I'm going to go through and flip these correctly, because that was just an example. How do we flip things correctly? We want to flip things on a very specific peg that we've already planned for. We have 2 of them. We have the head flip, that's what this red box is for, and we have the body flip. So this very top peg is what you want to do. This peg is actually kind of off centered. I wouldn't recommend adjusting it too much, but if you just bring it in a little bit, I think it'll look a lot better when we start flipping. We can also make it perfect by just kind of turning on our coordinates and seeing where the center line is. We turn those back off. So now we want to flip on this peg. We don't flip the first 5, and then once we get to the next one, number 6, we flip. We now have a full turnaround. I'm just gonna set this to 8 and then hit replay so you can kind of look at the turnaround. Now, straight away, the first thing you notice is there's a lot of flipping going on. Some stuff is kind of fine, like the hair, we shouldn't really bother with that. That's gonna be fine how it is. The belt, having the belt flip like that kind of changes the location of the hoop. So that would be something that we need to adjust. The bracelets on the arm vanish and then appear onto the other arm. That's something we need to adjust. The socks, because the socks are different. One is short, one is tall, one has wrinkles. We need to go through and adjust that as well. Pretty much everything else is nearly perfect. So let's just go through and fix all of those small things. And voila, we are done. You might notice some popping when it comes to the flipped versions, especially like in the front, the both immediate front views. Doesn't really matter. Again, the flipped version of the front and the back, so you can tween into a different pose. So most of the time you won't, pretty much all of the time, you won't be using those poses as actual poses. So having stuff be slightly off won't even be noticeable. That is our character's turnaround done. The next thing we need to focus on are substitutions, or a library, as some places will call them. So a library of hands, a library of mouths. We might touch on a library of eyes, so we can have preset blinking eyes. Once those two are done, we're practically finished. The last two sections, which is applying simple master controllers and how to clean up a file, pretty optional. If you're just doing a character for a project, like, this is it. This is pretty much it done. Even though this was less of a how to do video and more of a watch the process video, if you're hearing this, if you've got to the end, thanks for watching. See you next time. Hope you learned something.